And we're supposed to pretend that the state aren't the ones that chose Kenneth Copeland and Quindaria Zachary as their witnesses? Of course they did. Of course they did. And why did they choose them? What are the qualifications that Kenneth Copeland and Quindaria Zachary both had?
And we are back, y'all. Go ahead and hit that like button. We're going to jump right into the biggest Chef Schardt roast session that you're ever going to see. It's a long one, but it's worth it, y'all. Sit back, relax. Don't forget, we are paralegal school. If you want to work in the legal field, you want to work with attorneys like Chef Max Schardt, go to careerparalegal.com, put in your information, and we will contact you. Other than that, don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, sit back, relax, and just watch Chef Schardt cook 'em.
Accusations are easy to make. Allegations are easy to wage. And this indictment has plenty of both. But here's the thing. There's a big difference between making allegations and proving them in court beyond a reasonable doubt to the citizens of Fulton County. It's a different matter entirely. The state has spent the past year with a hammer in their hand, banging on a square peg that they call evidence. Banging, 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 trying so hard to fit that square peg into the round hole that they call their narrative, their theory. And the reality is that square peg does not fit in that round hole. It never fit. The state hasn't proven their case, and they certainly haven't proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. In this indictment, the state accused Shannon Stillwell in count 1 of violating conspiring to violate the Georgia RICO Act. He did not. They have not proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm going to ask you to find Shannon Stillwell not guilty. In count 2, the state alleged that Shannon Stillwell on January 10, 2015 shot and killed Donovan Thomas. He did not. The state hasn't proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and I'm going to ask you to find Shannon Stillwell not guilty of count 2. In counts 49 through 54, the state has alleged that Shannon Stillwell on March 14, 2022 shot and killed Shamel Drinks. He did not. The state has not proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and I'm going to ask you to find Shannon Stillwell not guilty. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think I've made this abundantly clear over the past year. My name is Max Schardt, and I represent Shannon Stillwell. But that's not the entire story. In fact, I have been joined by my co-counsel, Mr. David Botts, my wonderful legal assistant, Shaquille Kokomo, and it's been our honor to represent Mr. Shannon Stillwell throughout this process. And I'm excited for the opportunity to talk to all of you about the evidence that we have heard over this past year. But before we get started with that, I want to acknowledge you, the jurors. I want to acknowledge the immense time commitment that you have given this case. I want to acknowledge the sacrifice to your family, the sacrifice to your job, the sacrifice to your vacation plans. I want to acknowledge the patience that you have shown me and all the other attorneys. And I want to acknowledge the attention that you have shown this case. It's greatly appreciated. I acknowledge the fact that you have been paying close attention to this case. And for that reason, I'm going to try to avoid rehashing every piece of evidence. I'm going to try to be as direct and concise as possible to avoid unnecessarily taking up too much more of your time. Mr. Kokomo, if you could put page 3 up. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's just get into it, okay? Count 1, as the state discussed in their opening, Mr. Stillwell is charged with conspiracy to violate the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organization Act. And essentially they're saying he conspired to acquire, maintain directly or indirectly an interest in and control of United States currency and other personal property through a pattern of racketeering activity. And while associated with an enterprise, did unlawfully conspire to conduct and participate in, directly and indirectly, such enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity. It's a lot of words, that's a mouthful. And we're going to get to talking about what that means, what it doesn't mean, how it applies to the evidence that's been presented in this case. But before we even get there, I want to talk to you about a big part of the state's case in count 1, but also the other counts that they allege against my client. And that is the state's use of quote unquote expert witnesses, more specifically the gang investigators that they have called. Mr. Kokomo, if you could put on page 4. They've called, as you probably recall, a gentleman named Belknap, Investigator Underwood, Investigator Dennis, Investigator Gaither, and Investigator Viverito. Some of those people they've called multiple times in this case. And I want to talk to you about how to analyze their testimony and what your duties as jurors are to consider how much weight to give the testimony of those witnesses, those quote-unquote self-proclaimed experts. You'll be given this jury instruction, 130-130, about expert witnesses, and I'm going to focus on the second paragraph. It says, you are not required to accept the testimony of any witnesses, expert or otherwise. Testimony of an expert, like that of all witnesses, is to be given only such weight and credit as you think it is properly entitled to receive. So, and Mr. Atkins talked about this in his opening a little bit. Expert witnesses are just like any other witness, and you're going to be instructed on how to evaluate the credibility of any witness. Not just lay witnesses, but experts as well. And there's some factors that the Honorable Court is going to give you to consider in evaluating the credibility and evaluating how much weight to give these witnesses. Some of the factors are their manner of testifying, how they come across at the stand, how they act, their means and opportunity of knowing facts for which they testify, their interest or lack of interest in the outcome of the case. Are they biased? And their personal credibility as you observe it. Those are all factors you can consider when evaluating Investigator Gaither, Investigator Dennis, Investigator Viverito. So let's talk about the testimony and what we observed from the stand from these experts. I'd like to talk to you about their training. What did we learn about their training, all these experts? Well, we heard GGIA, Georgia Gang Investigators Association. We heard that a lot, about how there's 20 members. Remember? And we ask about what your training is, and they say, well, I go to the 2-day seminar every year, GGIA, there's 20 members, and then we learn who teaches at these seminars. Remember Detective Underwood? Remember Detective Underwood? And Detective Underwood was a nice lady, but she was sent up here on a fool's errand. They wanted her to testify about the intersection of gangs and music. And she clearly wasn't qualified. She knew almost nothing about music. But she said, yeah, I'm qualified because I think I did a 2-hour block a couple years ago on that. Okay. I think Viverito taught that class. Okay. So now Viverito is the teacher. So I asked her, I said, oh, very interesting. You took a 2-hour class a couple years ago in this subject, and that makes you an expert. Okay. Did you guys hear from any experts in Black history, Black art, any literature professors, anyone that has studied hip-hop, anyone from the hip-hop community, anyone from the community at large, when you guys all meet, the 20 of you, to talk about gang stuff at this seminar? No. It was just Investigator Viverito. Okay, what about scholarly reports? No, just Investigator Viverito. The more we ask these witnesses, these experts, about what their training is, what their background is, what their basis for testifying as experts and telling us how to analyze things, telling us what certain words mean, telling us what's gang-related or not, telling us what's relevant and what's not. It all stems from these meetings, this echo chamber that they have, where they hear from no one else, no outside voices at all. And they all call each other experts. And they even created an association to look official. Talk about their manner of testimony, or testifying, excuse me. Think about Lieutenant Gaither when she was on the stand. Remember when I was allowed to ask questions? I tried to ask her some questions when they weren't vague. Did she really want to answer my questions? You know, you see on direct with the state, back and forth, it's like a tango. Yeah, it's like a script. And then I get up, where another defense attorney gets up to ask questions. Can't get a simple answer for anything. What color is the sky? Oh, let me tell you about the FedEx video. Just commentary. Same thing with Investigator Viverito. Just unnecessary commentary. Avoiding answering questions that I ask. Clearly, Investigator Dennis was doing the same thing. He's out of here. He was sent home. Consider the manner that they testify and how much weight and credibility they really have in this matter. Think about their interest and lack of interest in the case, also known as their bias. Mr. Kokomo, would you put up Mr. Williams 70A for me? Remember this? Remember Lieutenant Gaither getting up there? Oh yeah, I saw that. This was important. This was a symbol of a gang war. This is the gang war that was going on. This is YSL declaring war on Bird Gang, which is an offshoot of the If Gang. Oh yeah, that's what it is. She told you that. As sure as can be, the expert that y'all are supposed to rely on. Well, what did my good friend, Attorney Brian Steele, do? Brought in the album cover. Wait a second, you're saying that this is a hawk skull and a gang war? Isn't this an album cover of a collaboration between my client, Young Thug, this is Attorney Steele talking, Young Thug and Future? And isn't his label Free Bands? And isn't Future's Free Bands mascot an eagle? Isn't this album cover just signifying the collaboration between the eagle and the snake? Doesn't that make more sense? After all, that's exactly what the album is. Okay. Mr. Kokomo, could you put up 471 VV? Remember this? Ms. Kokomo, that's not 471 VV. And actually, could you put up 471 VVA first? Okay, we saw that video. But first, actually, VV. Investigator Viverito brought this into evidence, said this was one of the social media posts that she pulled. Remember that? When she wrote no reports about pulling social media, we have no idea what she looked at, what she didn't. She just determines what's relevant. Not us. Not you. You don't get to see that. She determines. Remember? This came into evidence. She said, of course, she didn't give us a date because she wrote no report, but she said she collected this shortly after the shooting of Shamel Drinks. I run with... What you saying? I run with cold-blooded killers. Blooded killers. And that's Quamarvius Nichols. That looks pretty bad. Looks bad. It's posted a day after this killing. And it's a post, and clearly that's what it says. No other explanation. And then what do we find out later? What do we find out later? Could you put on 471 VV? Can you play it, Mr. Kokomo? We find out that this was part of a post, a story that had a bunch of different posts about fear of roller coasters, about being sick, whole bunch of different things. And then we finally get to the part where it has the lyrics from Young Boy Never Broke Again, right? Let's watch. We don't even see these lyrics. Why don't we see them on this post? Because they're on for a millisecond in the very beginning of the switch. And we hear about Instagram and how those aren't really words that Mr. Nichols would have typed. Those are words from a song that he picked. And sometimes you pick the lyrics if you want, and sometimes Instagram picks them for you. But what else do we see from watching the entire post? Those weren't even the featured lyrics. The lyrics were being transitioned to the lyrics that either Instagram or Mr. Nichols picked, but in a split millisecond, for whatever reason, these lyrics that Investigator Viverito so desperately wanted you guys to see were on the screen. And so what did Investigator Viverito do? She gets the post. She goes frame by frame until it gets to that exact point where it has what she feels looks like incriminating words by Mr. Nichols. Words that weren't even picked by him. And she freezes it, and she screenshots it, and then she puts it in front of you. Again, no report about what she did. She manipulated the evidence. And she's caught. But what does that tell you about her when we're talking about assessing credibility, your lack of interest in the case, your bias? Does she have an agenda when she does things like that? Of course she does. She's not a neutral witness. She might as well be sitting here. But I don't even think they would do that. Personal credibility as you observe it. Mr. Kokomo, could you put that other exhibit that you put up, the affidavit? 530 VV, this was the affidavit. Remember, we learned about affidavits, and Investigator Viverito was looking into the assassination attempts that she was of Mr. Rashawn Bennett in the jail. And she wanted to search Jeffrey Williams' home, right? And so she had to fill out an affidavit to give it to a judge to get permission to convince the judge, basically, to give her permission to search Jeffrey Williams' home for evidence. So what does she do? She finds a conversation, a text thread, where Mr. Williams says, YSL rule the world, kid, 24M on an N head. And she bolds it and makes it bigger and circles it for the judge to draw attention to that, because of course she wants the judge to feel that Mr. Williams is just ordering hits on people. That's the implication. That's the message she's sending the judge. And here I am. I know about Jeffrey Williams 3 and Jeffrey Williams 4 that Mr. Steele brought in, about the day before this text thread about Lil Uzi Vert putting a $24 million diamond into his own forehead, and Jeffrey Williams thinking that's funny, and that conversation happening, and this having nothing to do with ordering hits on anyone. And here I am. I say, oh, let me confront Investigator Viverito with this. And what was my point, really? What should have happened? Oh, yeah, I misinterpreted that. You're right. And then I would have been Mr. Smart Lawyer and say, see, jurors, Investigator Viverito doesn't always know what she's talking about. She misinterpreted that one when she's telling you what my client means when he says things, what other people mean when they say things. Investigator Viverito doesn't know. She makes mistakes. That's what I thought was going to happen. But what happened? Something far darker. Investigator Viverito sat in that chair and said, she doubled down. And she said, you know what? Even knowing what I know now about 24M on an N's head, even knowing what I know now, I would still put it in that affidavit. That's all I needed to hear. Yeah, I would mislead a judge. Yeah, I would lie in an affidavit. Yeah, I would cheat because I'm that invested in this case. I'm that invested with taking these guys down. I'm that invested. And if she's that invested in that, and the rest of these gang investigators are that invested, consider their credibility. Take what they say with a huge grain of salt. You don't have to believe what they say. You can disregard everything they say. The law allows you to do that. When they say, oh, this is a hybrid gang, and they can't even explain what that means or why it's classified as a hybrid gang, and it's just something that they come up with at their little private meetings every year at these 2-day seminars where they don't get input from anyone else. You don't have to buy that. It's not a hybrid gang. All right. Let's start talking about count one. Mr. Kokomo, if you could put page 14 up for me. And I did not envy Mr. Atkins because this is very complicated to even discuss. But essentially, the way I'm going to try to break this down is that the state needs to prove all elements of this case and all elements of this charge beyond a reasonable doubt, each and every element. And I'm going to focus on two different aspects as relates to the case against Shannon Still, this RICO case, count one. The knowing and willfully conspired with one or more others to participate in the enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity. So that's the first thing we're going to focus on, whether it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt that Shannon Stillwell knowingly and willfully conspired to participate in the enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity. Knowingly and willfully. Not he was just there, not he just hangs around, knowingly and willfully conspired. And then the second part that we're going to focus on a little bit later is number 6 and 7, that someone committed or that the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt that someone committed an overt act to further the criminal objective of this conspiracy. So, thank you, Mr. President. So when we're talking about the question about whether Mr. Stillwell knowingly and willfully conspired to basically take part in racketeering activity, a pattern of racketeering activity, I think we have to look at this whole case in context. I think we have to consider the origin story of what everyone's calling YSL, whatever you want to call it. The state seems to suggest that a bunch of people all came together to commit crimes. Just a big conspiracy. We're all going to come together and we're going to be a racketeering organization. That's not the case. Now, let me be clear. Of course, crimes were committed. Crimes were committed by people with YSL tattoos on their face. Crimes were committed by people that use YSL emojis on social media. Crimes, I'm sure, were committed by people that use the word slat. But that's not the issue here. The issue is whether Shannon Stillwell knowingly and willfully conspired to be part of this RICO organization. We've heard from different young men, and again, we heard from them in the year 2024, talking about things that happened in 2012, 2013. So please keep in mind, when you see a 28-year-old testifying in 2024, we're talking about maybe a 16-year-old back in 2012. And we've heard testimony from people from Cleveland Avenue. We heard from Walter Murphy. We heard from Trontavia Stevens. We heard testimony from people from Capitol Homes. We heard from Quindarius Zachary. We heard from Antonio Sledge. We know that my client, Mr. Stillwell, is from Thomasville. We know that he was raised by his grandmother. His mother was never part of his life due to her drug addiction. We know about these communities, about poverty, about the lack of education. I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush. This does not apply to everyone in these communities. But as a whole, we know the struggles that these communities have had. Lack of education, underemployment, drug addiction, kids looking for food, sharing clothes with peers, hopelessness, a sad, tacit acceptance that it's either rap, prison, or death. That's the reality where a lot of these kids at the time were living. And the state, throughout their presentation of this case, has played several videos of people, of young people in parking lots, at parks. Some of them might have a gun, using foul language. Someone might be smoking marijuana. Some might be saying slat. A lot of times people are, and it's kind of sad to watch, a lot of people talking about all the stuff they got when we all know they really don't have anything. About all the cars they own. Remember that one gentleman? Oh yeah, I'm getting my daughter this, I'm getting my son that car. You know, cap. We saw those videos, and I'm watching all these videos, and I'm wondering, you know, what's the point? Why is the state playing this? Just to show, like, bad kids, or who they feel are bad kids, just to show who they feel are future criminals? Like, what's the point of these videos that are really sad to watch? And then they played this video, and it's marked 54W, and I'm going to ask Mr. Kokomo to pull it up, but not play it yet. And it's a video where you see a group of people hanging out in the park, in a parking lot in the park, and you see Jeffrey Williams. Shannon Stillwell's not in this video. And you see Jeffrey Williams leaning on a car. And you see his emaciated body. You see his teeth that are rotten. And he's wearing pants that are clearly too short, too small, clearly been handed down, traded. They didn't come out of Phipps Plaza. You see him wearing a Alabama Letterman jacket. And I'm not talking about like the cool Letterman jacket that you might get at Mitchell and Ness. That's where you get like high price sporting goods, throwback stuff. Not cool like that. Like one that was probably made in the 80s. The Letterman is, the sleeves are all nasty. And the thing comes down to like his navel. And people are picking at him. Not in a harmful way, but picking at him. Picking at his clothes. Go ahead, Mr. Kokomo.
Checking out here.
Hold on, look. My partner say the man stole his swag. No.
Hey, Jay, how you say he do it?
Hold on. Let me wind it out.
Hey, Pop, get on the nigga.
Hold on. My
nigga,
Lil Jeff say he the king of white swagging, right? Shut up one time. Let's just let these folks see what you're doing now.
Straight out the goddamn. Bro, that was right here, man. You know what I'm saying?
All right, you check him out now.
What happens there? I think about when I was young. If I had to struggle, if I had to wear clothes that I was embarrassed about, if I was embarrassed about anything, I would hide, I would run, I would stay inside, I'd be ashamed, I might lash out at people picking at me. But what happens there? Jeffrey Williams takes those clothes, those tattered clothes, those old clothes, those ill-fitting clothes, and he twists it. He turns it around. Nah, these aren't rags. This ain't nothing to be ashamed of. You can take it down. This is white boy swag. This is swag. Think about that for a second. What that means, and I'm not suggesting Shannon Stillwell saw that video, but that mindset. I'm not ashamed where I came from. In fact, I'm going to turn it into a positive. I'm going to turn it into a sense of pride. And lo and behold, what happens? Everyone starts wearing the skinny jeans. Now think about if you're Walter Murphy. Think about if you're Trontavious Stevens in that Cleveland Avenue neighborhood. You're struggling, you're dealing with the same things that Jeffrey Williams is. And you're ashamed and you don't feel good about yourself. But then all of a sudden you see someone with confidence. Someone that's not ashamed. And all of a sudden, you know what else? They can rap. And people are starting to pay attention. And the shows start being booked. And 1 second it's around the corner, next second it's up the street, and then all of a sudden it's downtown Atlanta. Think about the pride. If you have nothing and you see someone that you know making it, and making it on his terms with that level of confidence. Now think about if you're Shannon Stillwell, raised by your grandmother, facing many of the same issues that Jeffrey's talking about, that he's rapping about, that these young men in Cleveland Avenue are facing. Many of the same challenges. And then you also want to be a rapper. And all of a sudden, this person that you can identify with, this person that has the confidence you wish you had, this person that's taking everything negative and turning it into a positive. And then he raps too. And it's all blowing up in your backyard. And you want to be a musician. And you want to go into the studio. And you want studio time. And you know Jeffrey Williams and his friends have studio time. Because now they have backing. And studio time ain't cheap. And you want connections. And you know he has connections. And you know those connections have paid off. B Slime, we know he's been on songs with B Slime. Vito, a songwriter for 300 Entertainment. Dolly, Rooney Lee, a signed artist. Shannon's been on songs with him. If you're Shannon Stillwell, isn't that exactly where you'd want to be? Isn't that exactly who you'd want to associate with? Not to conspire to violate any RICO laws. You want to be there because he's doing what you want to do and you are identifying with him. What have we learned about this quote-unquote gang that they're saying exists? You know, Detective Belknap, the first time he testified, talked about gangs and talked about red and blue don't mix. They have a solid hierarchy and structure, strict rules, chain of command. You're beaten in. You can't get out. If you try to get out, you're beaten out. If you're false flagging, if you're claiming to be part of the gang and you're not, severe repercussions occur. Well, what do we know about YSL? This group of young men, many of whom are musicians, many of whom have known Jeffrey Williams since they were little, who are thrilled for his success, who are living through him. Well, there's no initiation, no dues, no money sharing at all, no rules or organizational structure, no hierarchy, no rules about false flagging. Anyone can do it. Everyone does do it. People all over the world wiping their nose. It's not false flagging because it's not a gang. When LeBron James does it, he's not false flagging because there's no gang. He's showing he identifies with the movement. He identifies with the confidence that Jeffrey Williams shows. He identifies with turning negative into positive. There's no gender rules in YSL. And there's no exclusions. You a square? You're in. Sure. Whatever you want. You're a blood? Yeah, you can hang out. You're a Crip? Yeah, you can hang out. You're not affiliated at all? Yeah, you can hang out. You an athlete? Sure, you can hang out. You a musician? Yeah, you can hang out. You a nerd? Yeah, you can hang out. No one's sending anyone away because it's not a game. It's not exclusive. The only people that say this is a gang are those people that all talk to each other at GGIA, at the Georgia Gang Investigators Association, that don't want to hear from anyone else and just want to have their conclusions. Those people are also very biased in this case. So, has the state proven that Shannon Stillwell knowingly and willfully conspired to participate in an enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity? Well, Mr. Atkins says, well, he killed Donovan Thomas, so that's proof right there. Well, that's pretty circular logic. He didn't kill Donovan Thomas. Well, he killed Shamal Drinks, that's proof right there. No, he didn't kill Shamal Drinks. What have they proven Shannon Stillwell has done to say that he knowingly and willfully conspired to do anything other than to be around Jeffrey Williams and try to make music and further his rap career and be around people that he identified with? Okay. He's been in social media pictures with many of the people that he hangs out with. Okay. He uses the word slat. He uses a green snake emoji. Okay. A lot of people do that. He posted, he spends time in a recording studio with other people that know Jeffrey Williams? Yeah, of course he does. He makes rap videos and posts them online? Yep. Are his friends in the videos? Yep. He uses hand signs such as wiping his nose? Yeah. Post video. The state played one video in their closing about Shannon Stillwell calling out Game. Look at the bottom of that video. What's it say? Baller alert. Shannon wants to be a rapper. It's picked up on Baller Alert. It's aggregated throughout the internet. This is not coming off of Shannon's Instagram feed. This is national. Think about how many eyes are seeing that. Someone that no one knows calling out, trying to pick a fight with a well-known rapper. The Game. It's exactly what any music person, not necessarily a lawyer, I wouldn't tell Shannon to do that, but it's exactly what any music person would tell Shannon, who's trying to make it in the rap game. They would tell him to do exactly that. Get noticed. That doesn't mean he's knowingly and willfully conspiring to be part of any RICO organization. Mr. Kokomo, will you please put up page 13? This photo was put in by Attorney Steele. Who's going to tell LeBron that he's acting like a RICO conspirator? Who's going to tell LeBron that he's now a hybrid gang member? In fact, we just heard that the state said about wiping the nose meant, according to the gang experts. Who's going to tell LeBron that he's like ordering a hit in the middle of NBA warm-ups? Does that make any sense? Is what the gang investigators say, should we really take it? Hook, line, and sinker? I suggest we should not. Okay, I'm going to move on to the state's attempt to prove the commission of an overact in furtherance of a criminal objective. And mind you, they have to prove all of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt. So it's not like I have to show everyone did not happen. These elements all have to be proven by the state. Okay, and a reminder, this isn't just about people committing crime, because I'm just going to sit here and tell you there's no doubt that people that are in social media posts that are in evidence in this case, there's no doubt that people with YSL tattoos, there's no doubt that people that say slat have committed crimes. No one's disputing that. Isolated crimes by an individual or a group of individuals that have nothing to do with any alleged conspiracy cannot be overt acts. It's not just crimes that or other acts that are alleged against people associated with YSL. The acts must further the criminal objectives of the alleged conspiracy. So what do they focus on? They focus on, first of all, oddly, artistic expression. Jeffrey's lyrics. Like we're just going to pretend there's not a thing called rap music. We're going to pretend there's not a thing called artistic license. We're going to pretend there's not a thing called YSL, the record label. And when Jeffrey says slat in a song or slime in a song, which is recognized worldwide and is popular and sells albums, we're going to pretend that there's no context to this, and we're just going to pretend that all these lyrics are somehow designed to further a RICO organization. That's absurd. We're going to pretend Shannon Stillwell's statements about bragging, about beating a murder rap, which is good for his music career is somehow furthering some criminal objectives of some conspiracy, that's absurd. They list in their list of overt acts a bunch of social media posts. Social media posts of people with tattoos on their face. Nothing else. Just, oh, he took a picture with a tattoo on his face. Or wearing slime clothing or Make America Slamigate clothing. Clothing created, mind you, by Miles Farley, a person who was able to, again, turn negative into positive and turn that movement that was going on in Cleveland Avenue in a way for him to make money through selling clothing, for him to provide to his family. Turns out Miles Farley didn't subscribe to, oh, your options are athlete, entertainer, dead, or jail. He decided to design clothes. And what's his reward? You're part of a conspiracy. What does the state say were these overt acts? Well, they list a lot of petty drug selling. We heard from Trontavia Stevens. I don't know if you remember, but it was a long time ago, I know. But he talked about being pulled over. And I made sure to ask him. And he wasn't denying that he had a bag of weed on him. I said, hey, man, who went in on you, with you, on that bag of weed? I bought it. Okay, yeah, but when you sold it and made a profit, who are you going to share the money with? They look at me like I was crazy. Man, this is a $100 bag of weed. I ain't sharing money with anyone. I'm a drug dealer. I buy drugs and I sell drugs and I make a profit and I keep the profit. What evidence have we seen at all that any of this petty drug dealing had anything to do with furthering some criminal enterprise? It's isolated acts. They list gun possession. 2019, they say Shannon Stillwell is possession of a gun in furtherance of the criminal objectives of the conspiracy. Man, we have heard ever since Shannon Stillwell was falsely accused of killing Donovan Thomas in 2015 about people shooting at his head, people shooting at the car he's in. People are trying to kill him. And you think he's possessing a gun as some furtherance of some conspiracy? Does that make any sense? He's trying to survive. The murder of Jamari Holmes, tragic event, horrible, complete waste of 3 lives. Jamari Holmes, Rodelius Ryan, and Mr. Blaylock, 3 teenagers, senselessly, all lose their lives to varying degrees. Jamari Holmes obviously loses his life in the most real sense. Absolute tragedy. No one's going to say otherwise. It's listed as an overt act in furtherance of furtherance of the criminal objectives of the alleged conspiracy. It was like a 15-year-old doing something incredibly stupid. What objectives was that furthering? It wasn't. It's an isolated act committed by someone who screams out YSL and screams out SLAT. But that doesn't mean it's furthering any conspiracy. We hear about Jaden Myrick. First of all, who the heck is Jaden Myrick? I know they put him on this indictment like to try to say, oh yeah, he's a co-conspirator in this too. But they're the ones that put his name on this indictment. What have we heard about Jaden Myrick? We ever hear about Jaden Myrick ever meeting Shannon Stillwell? Do we have any indication that Jaden Myrick knows Shannon Stillwell? What about Jeffrey Williams? Any indication that Jaden Myrick knows Jeffrey Williams? Who the heck's Jaden Myrick? But some dope in the jail that's looking to make money by doing something incredibly stupid and attacking Rashawn Bennett. So he calls another dope, and they come up with their own little plan, but it has nothing to do with some broad conspiracy that Shannon Stillwell willfully and knowingly joined. We heard about jail calls. They're all listed as overt acts. Cordarius Dorsey calling Antonio Sumlin. Hey, I want you to attack some guy named, Victor Meadows, I think his name was. I can't even remember the guy's name. Had nothing to do with this case. And Antonio Summerlin's like, what? And he's like, okay, man. And he hangs up the phone and doesn't do anything about it ever again. Is that furthering a conspiracy? And this was the coup de grace. Christian Eppinger has an armed robbery arrest warrant out for him. And the police jump out on him, unmarked police, and say, get down, boy! And he has a gun. And he gets into it with the officer and shoots. And runs. And then another officer shoots at him and he shoots back. And he continues to run. Somehow the state is alleging that Christian Eppinger, no one else is there. No one's saying, hey, Christian Eppinger, do this for YSL. Christian Eppinger trying to avoid arrest, trying to stay free, completely isolated from anything else going on in this case. Somehow Christian Eppinger doing that making that idiotic decision to shoot an officer to avoid being arrested, somehow that is in furtherance of some conspiracy that Shannon Stillwell knowingly and willfully joined? Doesn't make any sense. In review of count one, ladies and gentlemen, YSL is many things. It's not a gang, full-fledged or hybrid, and it's certainly not a RICO enterprise. Shannon Stillwell, in associating himself with Jeffrey Williams and Trontavious Stevens and Quimarvius Nichols, his good friend, and Miles Farley and others, and Wooney Lee, he wasn't knowingly and willfully conspiring with anyone to participate in any enterprise aimed at a pattern of racketeering activity. He was in the mix. He was trying to make music. He was also, coincidentally, if we're being honest, he was selling drugs. He wasn't sharing them with anyone. He wasn't sharing the profits. He was selling drugs and trying to make music. And he was around the right people to be trying to do that with, because those connections were going to, in his mind, further his music career, which is what he wanted. And no overt acts were ever committed in furtherance of any conspiracy that Shannon Stillwell knowingly and willfully joined. The state has to prove every element of that charge beyond a reasonable doubt. They have failed. There is reasonable doubt. It's not true. And your verdict on count one must be not guilty. Let's talk about count two. Mr. Kokomo, if you would, pull up page 21. Actually, you don't need to do it. Count two is the charge from January 10, 2015, the murder of Donovan Thomas. Okay? But before we start talking about the evidence in the case, and we will, let's talk about music. Okay? We know that Shannon was working on music. I think we've made that clear. Through his phone, through the fact that he's always at the studio, through the fact that he has songs on his phone, multiple songs, some we've heard, some we haven't heard. Clearly, that's what he's doing in life. And we've also heard about drill music. We heard from Investigator Viverito. We heard from Antonio Sumlin. We heard from other people. We heard about the common themes of drill music, the things that make you marketable in that space. Okay? Violence, confrontation, having bodies, homicide, guns, more guns, bigger guns, being the toughest, being the baddest, not being scared, being a danger. Okay? And I'm not asking any of you to like that. I'm not suggesting I like that. Detective Underwood, she clearly didn't like it, and I'm not saying she's wrong. But it is what it is. That type of music exists. That type of music is popular, and that's the type of music that Shannon Stillwell was doing. We heard about the common terms in this drill music: ops, glizzy, blicky, red lights. And we heard 5 of Shannon's songs. We heard Slap Talk, Lizard Walk, Red Light, featuring B-Slime and Vito. Bull, S-H-I-T, with Dolly, Jeffrey's sister. And Ran This Money with Slime Life Shorty, a signed artist who had already made it, at least to a certain degree. And in those songs, I agree. We hear about all sorts of violence. We hear about red lights. We hear about glizzies, walk 'em down, homicides, FNs. We hear it all. And out of context, it doesn't paint Shannon Stillwell in the best light. And I don't think I've ever claimed that Shannon Stillwell is an angel either. But it is art. And when he references beating a homicide, when he references beating a murder rap, when he keeps bringing up Donovan Thomas, it's not a confession. That's how he's known. That's what he's known for. That's his selling point in this type of music that celebrates it, much to some of our chagrin. It just is what it is. We saw a post that Shannon Stillwell made on January 27, 2022, page 24, Mr. Kokomo. And this is the untranslated version, but I'm not hiding from it. The translated version says peanut stone grave. But what does it say? I fell off 100 times, 100 times I bounced back. Life size, hashtag life size lizard. Lizard, what he's rapping under, lizard walk. Okay? And it says Manny Tumpa de Piedra. What's he talking about here? Fell off 100 times. Why does he keep referencing Donovan Thomas? Years later, he's already been arrested for this charge. Wouldn't he be quiet about it? He would if he did it. But why does he keep bringing up Donovan Thomas? Well, I have 2 things for you to consider. First, maybe, just maybe, on that particular day in June of 2022, Shannon Stillwell had enough. For 7 years, the police put a target on his back, and people had been shooting at him. He was shot at the Green Store. They shot at his head. He was so bold to go to JJ's Chicken and Fish to get himself some food with the mother of his child and another female who was driving. He was so bold to do that when they left that parking lot, 3 men in a car sped up behind him and shot at that car, riddling the back of that car with bullets, shooting poor Tiara Jones in the face, instantly killing the driver, Miss Jones, causing the car to careen and turn over and over and over, severely injuring Mr. Stillwell, scarring his head to this day, putting him in the hospital for months, putting the mother of his child in the hospital for a month. And then, when the police come to talk to Mr. Stillwell, remember what he does? He feels bad about the situation. He feels awful. He asks the officer, can I write a letter of remorse to Tierra Jones's family. And he does. And then the officer says, well, can you talk to me about the case? And know what he does? He talks to the officers about the case. And he gives names. He gives names of the people that he feels were in that car, that red car that sped up behind him, tried to kill him, and killed Tierra Jones. He gave up those names. And what was his reward? Page 26, Mr. Kokomo. I think it was Investigator Griffin, I think is the investigator that was investigating that case. What did he tell you? The discovery got out and it was posted online. And the fact that Shannon Stillwell had dared talk to the police to try to help solve the senseless murder of an innocent woman was broadcast on Instagram and social media. And people were chastising Shannon Stillwell and coming at him on social media and in real life over the fact that he was made such a ridiculous decision as to try to bring justice to Tierra Jones's family. That was his reward for that. So yeah, people shooting at his head, narrowly missing at the Green store. People shooting at him in a car, killing someone in the car and putting him in the hospital. People chastising him online for being so bold to tell the police what happened, who killed Tierra Jones, poor Tierra Jones. So yeah, maybe in January 2022, just maybe, possibly, he had enough. He was sick of the nonsense. If you want to say it, then I'll be it. You keep putting me down 100 times, you're making me fall, and I keep getting back up. And what's it all? Ultimately, what's the origin story of it all? The death of Donovan Thomas. That's how it started. It doesn't mean he did it. That's how it started. That's why he has that target on his back. There's another possibility as well. Mr. Stillwell is just a kid who was raised by his grandmother in Thomasville. Nothing more, nothing less. But all of a sudden, he was known as a tough guy behind this. Wasn't true, but that was the public perception. That was the persona that was thrust on him. And maybe, while he was sick of it, sick of being shot at, sick of being chastised, sick of being threatened, maybe also a calculation was made. You know what? If they're going to keep shooting at me, I might as well lean into this a little bit. That does have traction in the streets. That does have traction in the music industry. Maybe that's why he's hashtagging his rap name in the post. The bottom line is, yes, I acknowledge he's referencing Donovan Thomas in songs. He's not giving any inside information in these songs that wasn't publicly known. Remember, he had been arrested. He'd been at prelims. He knows what the case is about. He's heard testimony about the case by this time, by the time he's making his songs. So he's not sharing any information that only the killer would know. Of course he's not, because he's not the killer. But maybe he is leaning into the bad boy image a little bit. But here's the thing. You might like my explanation or not. But could you put on 27, please? But let's just think. If songs were confessions, what would that really mean? Could you put on 28? Remember that song, Homicide by Lil Woody, Kenneth Copeland? Who played the role of the assassin? Threat, Trevante Turner. You watched the video. I don't think we need to watch it again. Who gets killed? Someone who looks like Donovan Thomas. Who put money on his head? Kenneth Copeland. If songs are confessions, then Kenneth Copeland is confessed. He hasn't been charged. He's not sitting here on this indictment. So maybe songs are just songs, and posts are just posts. So let's talk about Donovan Thomas and some of the evidence in this case. Eyewitnesses. Who did we hear from? We heard from Reginald Hendricks. He was a gentleman that was shot. He was standing near Donovan Thomas. He didn't identify anyone. We heard from two witnesses, two people that were in the barbershop, working the barbershop. They heard shots. They ducked. They described what happened afterwards. No one identified anyone out of those two witnesses. We heard from a man named Sammy Davis, an older gentleman who lived across the street, who knew Donovan Thomas. They called him Car Wash. He washed Donovan Thomas's car. He didn't see anyone in the car. That was his testimony. And then we didn't hear from, but we heard about someone named Spencer Wright. Well, actually, we heard about someone named Nicholas Robinson. What did we hear about Nicholas Robinson? And Investigator Thorpe talked about it, and definitely District Attorney Sprinkle talked about this as well. What did we hear about Nicholas Robinson? We heard about Nicholas Robinson September of 2015. He was being arrested for felony theft and a probation matter. And when he's being arrested, and when I say he's being arrested by the Atlanta Police Department, by an officer, and he's hours away from having, what I like to talk about, the Fulton County Blues. He's hours away from having that blue jumpsuit on, right? And what did we learn that Nicholas Robinson did? He said, "Whoa, you guys arrested me. I want to go talk to a detective about a case." So they take him to Thorpe. He wanted to talk to him about the Donovan Thomas homicide. They take him to Thorpe, and Thorpe starts to interview him. Okay? And Nicholas Robinson claims he's at the scene and starts talking to Investigator Thorpe about what he saw. And that would be hearsay to talk about because he didn't testify. But we also heard that in the middle of that interview, Lieutenant Gaither was there. She's doing research into the background of this Nicholas Robinson. And what does Lieutenant Gaither realize? Wait a second. This man who's saying his name is Nicholas Robinson, this man is telling Detective Thorpe his name is Nicholas Robinson, his name is actually Spencer Wright. So she goes and tells Thorpe. And what does Thorpe do? He's interviewing someone about what they allegedly saw in this high-profile case, and this person has just lied to him about his name. What does Thorpe do? He continues to interview him. And then the very next day, he goes out and takes warrants on 4 people, including my client. Then we hear about DA Sprinkle taking over this case in the investigation in early 2016. And him seeing this mention of this Nicholas Robinson, who was really Spencer Wright, and where he said he was when he witnessed events. And we hear about DA Sprinkle getting the surveillance and checking into it and talking to Spencer Wright. Where did you say you were? On what bench? Where? Circle it on his picture. And about how he went to look at the surveillance himself. And what did he see? An empty bench. Spencer Wright not only lied about his name, but he lied about a lot more. But know who he duped? Detective Thorpe. We're going to get back to Spencer Wright in a minute. We have no ballistics from the Donovan Thomas case, no DNA or fingerprints. We have an infinity car, which we will talk about in a minute as well. But essentially this case, this Donovan Thomas case, comes down to 2 witnesses. And in my opening, I warned you all about people wearing the Fulton County blues. That was the theme of my opening. Because as it's played out, it turns out Rice Street is a disgusting, horrible place. Being locked up anywhere is awful. And there are people who will lie on other people to stay out of Rice Street. You don't believe me? Spencer Wright, Nicholas Robinson. He's the proof of concept right there. Getting locked up, wants to talk to the detective, and then completely makes things up. And the next day, warrants are being signed. This is not some theory that I have that people lie to get themselves out of trouble. It's proven. Spencer Wright did it. He's not the only one who did it. So the state has these two witnesses, Quindarius Zachary and Kenneth Copeland. Those are the two witnesses. And I've been doing this long enough. They're horrible witnesses. They're liars. They have every reason to lie. They have every motivation to lie. They are inconsistent. They tell different stories every time they talk about the things they talk about. The state knows they're horrible witnesses. But here's what happens. In closing, the state says, they're not our witnesses. We didn't choose those witnesses. They're Shannon Stillwell's friends. He chose those witnesses. That's their line. They might not use it now because I already said it. But that's their line. But let's think about that for a second. That's not their witnesses. First of all, they're the ones that called them to the stand. But that's not their witnesses. Look at this indictment. 28 names. Quindarius Zachary? Is he on this indictment? No. Kenneth Copeland? Is he on this indictment? No. Are any of us going to really sit here and pretend that if the state was really being honest about who to charge about the events in 2015, 2014, 2015, that Kenneth Copeland wouldn't be on that indictment? Kenneth Copeland was a one-man crime wave in 2014, 2015. Yet, he's not on this indictment. Quindarius Zachary was a straw purchaser for guns. Quindarius Zachary was right in the middle, the impetus for one of the overt acts, the April 28th, 2015 shooting of houses. He's right in the middle of this. And they're not on the indictment? And we're supposed to pretend that the state aren't the ones that chose Kenneth Copeland and Quindarius Zachary as their witnesses? Of course they did. Of course they did. And why did they choose them? What are the qualifications that Kenneth Copeland and Quindarius Zachary both had when it really comes down to it? They're two people that are willing to lie on others to get themselves out of trouble. That was one qualification that they had. And two, they are two people that happened to put themselves in situations, serious situations, that would require them to lie on others to get themselves out of trouble. Those were their two qualifications. And the state said, sounds good. We'll sign you up. You're our witnesses. You're no longer on this indictment. Let's talk about Kenneth Copeland's credibility. So use the same test you do for those quote-unquote expert witnesses. What's his bias, his motive? How's he come across on the stand? What are his motivations? Well, we know he really hates jail. That was clear. I submit to you that it seems that not only does he hate jail, but he almost has a mental disorder about, he literally said, I'd rather die than go to Rice Street. That's extreme. He's told us, I would do anything to stay out of jail. I would lie on anyone to get myself out of trouble. He has his own term for what he does, the finesse. He really hates jail. What else do we know about Kenneth Copeland? Well, we know about, and I'm going to ask y'all to think back and remember this when he was on the stand, a case, 21 CP 197618, State of Georgia versus Kenneth Copeland. Remember that? When he was actually in jail and he picked up another charge because he claimed that a jail worker attacked him and sprayed him with OC spray for no good cause. And he brought charges, or tried to bring charges, against this poor jail worker. What do we know? The surveillance from the jail was pulled. The investigators looked at it, as they should. Even Kenneth Copeland, a known liar, when he makes allegations against the police, yes, it should be looked into. And it was. And what did they find? No OC spray was emitted. In fact, the officer that was accused didn't even have OC spray on them at the time. So what happened to Kenneth Copeland in that case? Well, he was charged with false statement and false report of a crime, 2 felonies, excuse me. So as a result of his lie, he gets charged with these 2 felonies. False statement and false report of a crime. And it's pending, and it's pending, and it's pending. Then all of a sudden, as this case is ramping up, and Mr. Copeland's going to have to take the stand and be asked about his pending charges and his prior lies, all of a sudden, on January 18th, 2024, Fonnie Willis and her employee, Kenneth Hutcherson, quietly dismissed the case against Kenneth Copeland, the case of false statement, a case of false report of a crime. Why did they do it, according to that sheet? Was it, oh, we actually looked at the video again and it actually supported Kenneth Copeland? No. Was it the victim didn't want to prosecute? No. Prosecutorial discretion. They decided it was in their best interest to dismiss that case against Kenneth Copeland before he testified. Remember I told Kenneth Copeland about it? Thought he was going to get up and hug me. He said, my case is dismissed? Yep, sure was. State took care of you. You're not on this indictment either. Kenneth Copeland's a liar. He's a proven liar. And let's talk about his prior statements he made, because we know on June 10, 2015 is when he said Demekion Garlington gave him certain information and that Shannon Stillwell was one of the people responsible for killing Donovan Thomas. Demekion told him at the McDonald's. That's what Kenneth Copeland said on June 10, 2015. Well, we learned that Kenneth Copeland actually met with the police in 2015 4 times prior to that June 10, 2015 interview. We learned that he met with investigator Thorpe on January 11th. Now, mind you, all these meetings, presumably, if it were true, Kenneth Copeland would have that knowledge of what Demekion Garlington said to him for all these meetings. January 11, 2015, he goes in to talk to Thorpe. Doesn't say anything about Demekion Garlington telling him that Shannon Stillwell is involved in Donovan Thomas's murder. Places himself at the Green Store, which is less than a minute away from the scene of the Donovan Thomas murder. And he's asked about, specifically by Detective Thorpe, if he's ever rented or driven an Infiniti. And what does Kenneth Copeland say? No, never. Denies it completely. That's on January 11th. That's the night of the night going into the morning after of the Donovan Thomas homicide. And of course, we know that's a lie because Kenneth Copeland was in the Affinity on the night of January 9th with Quindarius Zachary. So he lies right off the bat to Detective Thorpe. January 28th, he meets with Thorpe, Dennis, and Gaither. Again, never mentions this supposed statement by Demekion Garlington about Shannon Stillwell being involved. In fact, he's asked specifically who he thought killed Donovan Thomas. He mentions his friend Doc and goes back and forth about whether Doc could have done it or not. He shares a theory about Donovan Thomas running off with someone's drugs. He shares a theory about Kelvin Watts robbing people and Donovan Thomas being caught in that situation. And he's also asked on January 28th about a rumor that he stole Donovan Thomas's chain. And what's he say? Oh no, I didn't do that. Someone else apparently stole Donovan Thomas' chain and they brought it to me and I realized it was Donovan Thomas's stuff and I returned it. I don't have any problems with Donovan Thomas. Me and Donovan Thomas are cool. He also said that on the 11th. So then we go to February 20th, the third statement he gave. Again, never mentions anything about what Demekion Garlington supposedly told him. And investigator Curry, asked him about the Donovan Thomas case. Doesn't know anything. And then on February 21st, with Gaither and Thorpe, he's again asked about the Donovan Thomas case. Never mentions, oh, Demekion Garlington at the McDonald's told me that Shannon Stillwell did it. Again, he's asked about Donovan Thomas's chain, and it's another lie. Oh, well, someone brought it to me. He sticks with that lie. Lie after lie after lie. Denying beef with Donovan Thomas, denying stealing Donovan Thomas's chain, denying ever being in an Infinity. But those are the statements that Kenneth Copeland gave leading up to June 10th, 2015. Could you put on page 33, Mr. Kokomo? So, this is a picture from June 10th, 2015 that's in evidence. And it is misleading. It shows Mr. Copeland wearing street clothes, civilian clothes, not a blue jumpsuit. But let's not get confused. Let's not get it twisted. On June 10th, 2015, Kenneth Copeland, for the first time, was headed to jail for serious charges. That's what's different about this interview. He was headed to Rice Street. He had a gun charge from the Dunbar Rec Center. Remember when he brought the stick into the rec center and left it on the bleachers? He had just been arrested on that warrant from when he did that. And when they arrested him on the warrant, they came into his girlfriend Deshawn Quarterman's apartment. And what did they find? They find another gun, a stolen Smith & Wesson, in Deshawn's kitchen. And they find a stolen MacBook in Deshawn's apartment. And they find stolen IDs and stolen property in Deshawn's car. And so now we got two guns, stolen property. Oh, and then the police are saying, oh, this stolen property, it's linked to auto breakings that have happened in your neighborhood. So he's got guns, and he's got a federal agent in there as well, Agent Cunningham, who's talking about these cases going federal. He's got a lot going on. And promises are made. Well, let's talk about the threats first. And all these officers say, oh, I wouldn't threaten him. I wouldn't threaten him. I threatened no bodily harm on him. I'm going to tell you, Max Schardt said this here today. Y'all threaten to punch me in the face anytime. But don't threaten to put me in prison for 25 years, no parole. That's a real threat that gets my attention. You can punch me. But the state and the police act like statements that Agent Cunningham made, like, you're an armed career criminal. We got you dead to rights. You're facing 15 plus 10. That's 25. no parole. You're not going to get out till you're 48. And that's not even including the conspiracies. You won't see your children till you're 48. That's a threat. That's a lot more bigger threat than I'm going to punch you in the face or we're going to beat you until you confess. That's a threat. What else do they say? It's totally up to you if these charges go federal or not. You have to help yourself. I'm going to call the U.S. attorney and they're going to ask me, what did he do to help himself? You see what goes on here? This isn't an accident. This is the playbook. Get the liar, get him jammed up, threaten him, tell him he's not going to see his kids again until he's 48, and then, oh, but maybe we can do something for you. You just got to give us what we want. And yes, that was enough to make self-admitted liar, self-admitted finesser, a person who fully admits that he would lie on anyone to get out of jail, to stay out of jail, to get out of trouble. That was enough to coax him to make up a story about Shannon Stillwell and others. And that was actually enough to put his plan in motion because he knew someone was going to have to back up his story. And that was enough to have him reach out to Demekion Garlington and try to get Demekion Garlington to go out and go on with the story, which, of course, Mr. Copeland told us he's no longer friends with Mr. Garlington because Mr. Garlington would not go along with that story. Or he's upset with Mr. Garlington because Mr. Garlington would not go along with that story. Maybe you say, Max, we get it. He's a liar. He was jammed up. But maybe this threat of prosecution was what was needed to bring out the truth. Maybe he was being truthful on June 10, 2015. Well, let's think about what else he said on June 10, 2015. Remember when they were talking about those auto breakings that they suspected him of? And said, you're going to have to answer these auto breakings. Why do you have all this property and these cars? We know you're involved. Remember what he said? Nah. That was Lil Mike and Quez that did them. Remember the detectives? They looked at each other, Lil Mike and Quez, Lil Mike and Quez. But what did we learn in the cross-examination of Kenneth Copeland? Little Mike and Quez, not only did they not do the auto breakings that Kenneth Copeland claimed they did on June 10, 2015, Little Mike and Quez, they don't exist. He made them up on the spot on June 10th of 2015. So my answer to you, if you think, oh, this pressure was needed to get Kenneth Copeland to finally be truthful, nope. He was lying. He made up people that didn't exist in this very statement that the state wants you to take as truthful from one of the biggest liars we've ever seen in our lives. Mr. Kokomo, if you could play what's on page 35. And what did Kenneth Copeland say on a call from the Fayette County Jail on December 21st, 2022, on a recorded call that Attorney Steele brought out?
First thing I did, I ain't got nothing to do. I lied on to it because, you know what I mean, I found out that he I can't say that, I can't say that on the phone, but, you know what I mean, it's some shit happened between me and him back then. And just so happened I got locked up the next day. You feel me?
He admitted. He said, I lied on Thug. The very same interview, he was saying all sorts of things about thugs. He admitted he was lying. He was making stuff up to get himself out of trouble, to get out of his situation. And he got caught in a recorded line saying as much. Ladies and gentlemen, Detective Thorpe fell for the finesse. Kenneth Copeland said it was easy. Lieutenant Gaither fell for the finesse. The police report fell for the police department fell for the finesse. Kenneth Copeland got up on the stand and explained the finesse to you, to your faces. We know better than to fall for Kenneth Copeland's finesse. We know better than to just accept his words. Mr. Kokomo, if you put on page 36. This is the other state's witness, the other witness that they chose to bring in front of you, Quindarius Zachary. And yes, he's wearing the jail blues, and he had every reason to lie to get himself out of trouble. First of all, what did Quindarius Zachary say at trial? He admitted that he lied on Shannon in two prior statements. One August 5th, 2015 to Lieutenant Gaither, and then one in a proffer session on March 3rd of 2017. And he also admitted on cross-examination that even those two statements, those two lies he told about Shannon Stillwell, were not even consistent with each other. But none of the police seemed to mind. None of the prosecutors seemed to mind. Why? Remember his lie? His lie was, oh, the night of the Donovan Thomas killing, Shannon Stillwell confessed to me at Jeffrey Williams' condo. And then he also went on to lie about Shannon Stillwell on this August 5th, 2015 statement, lied about Shannon Stillwell's involvement in really a bunch of other cases. Cases that Shannon Stillwell has never been charged with. He just lied on Shannon. And he admitted his motivation for lying on Shannon. He admitted that he knew, or he was under the belief, that when he talked to the police, when he talked to Lieutenant Gaither, first of all, he needed to get bond. He had been locked up for about 7 days. His family had been calling Gaither. We heard about that. Begging her to go up and talk to him. What was the urgency? Well, we didn't get into details, but we learned that Mr. Zachary has a serious illness. A serious illness that he wasn't going to fare well at Rice Street under those conditions. So he needed to get out. So he has people calling Gaither, come see me, I want to talk to you. And then he also has the motivation of the April 28, 2015 case, which he was facing at this time. He told you, I was under the impression, and I didn't do the math, this may be right, this may be wrong, but this was his impression, that he was facing something like 185 years. Yeah, that's pretty good motivation to lie. And then he was also concerned because he got caught with a gun on May 7th, 2015, that he knew was ballistically linked to other crimes. So that was a reason for him to lie. And finally, why Shannon? Because he wanted to get back at Demekion Garlington. Because Demekion had told the police about the April 28, 2015 incident. And he figured blaming Shannon for things was a way to get back at Demekion, because at that time, Demekion and Shannon were close friends. So those were his motivations. Let's talk about the statements he gave. We heard about Investigator Gaither being called repeatedly to go down there and talk to him. on August 5th, 2015. And she said, okay. Remember, he wanted to talk about other stuff. He didn't want to talk about his case. He wanted to immediately get to the point where he's telling lies on other people to get bond or get released, get consideration. And Gaither, to her credit, said, no, we got to talk about your case first. Let's talk about April 28, 2015. And what he said? I wasn't there. I wasn't there. The only reason I know about it is because Demekion Garlington told me the next day. So immediately, he's lying to the police, saying he wasn't there, which of course we know he was there. Lieutenant Gaither knows he was there. But what's his explanation? It's odd. It's interesting. It seems to be a recurring theme. I wasn't there, but, and where did he say was also? I was at home because I'm always sick, right? I was at home. I'm always sick. I wasn't there. And the only reason I know about this is because Demekion Garlington the next day confessed to me. Seeing a pattern? Everyone's always confessing to Quindarius Zachary, according to Quindarius Zachary. Of course, that was a lie. Demekion Garlington had not confessed to him. That was made up. He made up a story about someone confessing to him. And in fact, he was there. Gaither called him on it. He about 2 or 3 times said, I swear I'm telling the truth. I swear, I swear, I swear. And finally he gave up the lie. And then he proceeded to move on to other cases and make up lies on Shannon. March 3rd, 2017 was the second statement set up by his lawyers. You got to understand where the proper session is, as it was a session for him to give as much information as he could about as many instances as he could. And the DAs were in the room. They can consider the information given, and then they can give any consideration that they deem appropriate to Quindarius Zachary for his assistance in providing information. Those were the 2 statements. But here's the thing. You know, it's not complicated to keep a story straight if it's the truth. But if you're making up lies, the context, the details tend to change. It's a little bit more difficult to keep everything straight. And I think about all of us. You know, I think about when I was a kid. I saw a space shuttle explode on TV when I was sitting in a classroom watching it take off. And I remember exactly where I was. I remember who was sitting next to me. I remember whose class it was. I remember what grade I was in. It's etched into my memory. I remember when my favorite football team first won their Super Bowl in my lifetime. I remember everything about that. I remember who the announcers were. I remember who won the MVP. I remember what room I was watching the game in. I remember who I was watching the game with. I remember when this country elected their first black president, our first black president. I remember who I was watching TV with that night, the emotions, what room I was in, what channel I was watching. I remember even silly things. I remember watching the Oscars and seeing a man run up on another man and slap him in the face while I was watching with my wife on our bed in our old house while she talked on the phone with her sister. I remember those details, those things that are etched into my mind. And I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, if a friend of mine came up to me in real life like this, if it really happened, if a friend of mine came up to me and said, Max, I have something to tell you. Earlier tonight, I murdered one of the most powerful gang members in all of Atlanta. I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, that I would remember exactly where I was when he said it. I would know exactly what was going on, where we were, who else was there, and what exactly was said. Because that's the type of thing you wouldn't forget. That's the type of thing you wouldn't forget details of. But what do we know about Quindarius Zachary's renditions of this alleged confession by Shannon Stillwell? It changed. It changed from August 5th, 2015 to March 3rd of 2017. On August 5th, 2015, he claimed that Shannon Stillwell confessed, but just said, we caught Nut down bad. On August 5th, 2015, he said, we caught Nut down bad. And then, according to Mr. Zachary, on August 5th, 2015, Shannon Stillwell also named 3 other individuals in the car. That was his statement on August 5th, 2015. But then on March 3rd, 2017, he's asked about the same alleged confession. And it's, oh, Shannon just told me he caught Nut down bad, and he didn't give me any other details at all. Didn't say anyone else who was in the car. What about the timing of the confession? On August 5th, 2015, Quindarius Zachary claims the confession occurred just as he and Moontunk pulled up to Jeffrey's condo. And Shannon was about to go to a girl's house, and we crossed paths, and he confessed to me. On March 3rd, 2017, what was the story? No, Shannon wasn't there when I arrived at the Sky House. Shannon didn't show up till later that night, till about 4 or 5 a.m. He was dropped off by some girls. I know because I let him into the condo. How do those details change about something that would stick in your mind if it were true? And the answer is because it's not true. Because it was a story that was made up by Quindarius Zachary, who was facing 185 years, who needed to get out of jail because he had a serious illness, who knew that the gun he had been arrested with was going to be linked to other crimes. And just like Kenneth Copeland, he was someone that was willing to lie to get himself out of trouble. And at that particular time, the state, the investigators, and everyone else had enough leverage on him to force him to make that decision to lie on someone else to save himself. It's a sick game. It is a sick, sick game. So we got these 2 liars who were strategically interviewed at the very time they're most likely to lie. Wouldn't it be cool if we had some corroboration of what these 2 known liars claim? Phone records. The state has repeatedly claimed that there's some corroboration in these phone records. And I give Agent Bernie some credit. That was the FBI cast agent that charts, that talks about the phone records and plots them. He was very careful. He was very clear. This does not give exact locations. First of all, it's just devices, not people. But it doesn't give exact locations. It doesn't tell you where people were. It gives a general area. It says, it tells you what cell phone may have been closest to the device when it was being used. And these cell phone towers have all different radiuses and all different signal strengths. So you just get a general idea. You've got to be very careful about what you read into these cell phone records. That's what he said, the expert. And yes, he talked about different people calling different people that know each other calling different people on January 10, 2015. Shouldn't be that surprising. And yeah, he put Kenneth Copeland, as did ADA Sprinkle, Kenneth Copeland at the Green Store, in the general area of the Green Store. around the time of the homicide. The green store that is what? A minute away from the barber shop? What did the phone records corroborate again? That Kenneth Copeland was right there at the time of the murder? That people were generally going north and south on the highway? What did they say about Shannon Stillwell? Where did they say he was? Go look at those phone records. Did they provide any cell phone records for Shannon Stillwell? How about Diamante Kendrick? What is the power of those cell phone records again? What did they corroborate? Did they have Kenneth Copeland wear a wire? Remember when he was so desperate to get out of jail, I'll wear a wire, I'll wear a wire. That would have been an idea. Prove what you're saying, Kenneth. You're a liar. You're a known liar. Don't just tell us stuff. Prove it. Nope, they didn't put a wire on Kenneth. What about wiretapping phones? We know they know how to do that. Did they wiretap anyone's phone to corroborate anything Kenneth Copeland and Quindaria Zachary said? Nope. So then we get to surveillance video. And this is where this gets kind of ugly. Kenneth Copeland claims he was at the green store, not outside the barber shop at the time of the killing. And his phone records put him in that general area. How many times have myself or Attorney Steele asked about the green store? Detective Thorpe claims that he went to the green store to try to get surveillance, but he didn't think they had any. Really? Because I heard about my client being shot at, his head being shot at that very same green store, and I heard the officer responded and looked at the surveillance to determine who was shooting at my client. I've seen pictures of the green store. I see the cameras. They don't have surveillance. Okay, Detective Thorpe, so you tried to get surveillance. Do you have that in any of your reports? Any documentation of you going to the green store to try to get surveillance to corroborate the claims of Kenneth Copeland? Oh, no, that's not in my report. Ask Gaither, Lieutenant Gaither, about the green store. Why would I go to the green store? That's not even relevant. Really? I beg to differ. She had no interest in corroborating Kenneth Copeland. So then we talk about the McDonald's surveillance. The McDonald's at Old Hateville and Cleveland Avenue. The very spot where Kenneth Copeland claims in his story that everyone met and that Demekion Garlington told him who killed Donovan Thomas. Well, we know the McDonald's has surveillance. That's been testified to by several officers. And we know we don't have the McDonald's surveillance for January 10th, 2015. So I ask, Attorney Steele asks, I ask, other attorneys ask. First we ask Gaither, did you ever try to get surveillance to McDonald's? And what did she say? Oh, we went like 2 or 3 months later, we went and we talked to a general manager and they weren't able to get into the cameras right then, but we took the card and we gave the card to Thorpe. That was her explanation of the efforts to get camera footage from the McDonald's. I said, okay, do you have that in a report that you drove down to the McDonald's and talked to? Who was the person you talked to? What was their title? What was their name? Where's the card? Oh, no, I don't have that in a report. Nope. Okay, so then we asked Thorpe, what did you do to get surveillance from the McDonald's to corroborate anything Kenneth Copeland said? And this is where it gets ugly. He said, I went a couple days later and I talked to the people and they said the footage had been erased. The 15-day or however many days the cycle is ended and all the footage was erased and it started all over again. That piqued our interest. Because everyone knows that's not the way surveillance cameras work. Everyone knows it's first in, first out on a rolling basis, meaning if it's a 15-day cycle, at the end of 15 days, everything isn't just erased, but it starts taping over the beginning parts again, so you always have 15 days memory. Everyone knows that you wouldn't go to the McDonald's 2 days after an incident and find out that the whole system had been erased, because that's not how surveillance systems work. And we asked every officer, it seemed, that came up here, you ever hear of a surveillance system working that way? Where just all erases at one time, or does it roll first in, first out? Every one of them said they never heard of a surveillance system just erasing all at one time. Every single one of them. So, does that McDonald's on that corner of Old Hateful and Cleveland Avenue have a one-of-a-kind, a one-of-one surveillance system that they're operating? I don't think so. But what does that mean? It means Detective Thorpe lied to us. He lied to y'all. He didn't go to try to get that surveillance from the McDonald's. He didn't go 2 days later. What did we hear from D.A. Sprinkle? Remember that? And that's a straight shooter, D.A. Sprinkle. What did D.A. Sprinkle said when we asked him about it? Hey, did Detective Thorpe ever mention trying to go get the footage from the McDonald's? Did that ever come up? Because, we've been asking a lot about this McDonald's footage. What did D.A. Sprinkle say? Detective Thorpe never brought that up to me. And that seems like something he would have brought up. Detective Thorpe lied. Either that, or he did go get the footage, and it doesn't back up Kenneth Copeland's claims, and it's in his missing file somewhere, which he can't find to bring to court. I guess that's a possibility. But he lied. All right, so the elephant in the room. Who killed Donovan Thomas? It's not our burden to solve this case, first of all. The jury instructions are clear. It's not our job to solve cases, especially cases that happened 9 years ago. But to the extent that it factors into the question of reasonable doubt that Mr. Stillwell committed that crime, let's just leave it like this. I know someone who has a closest associate named Trevante Turner. I know of someone who is arch enemies with a man named Kelvin Watts, who is the brother of Donovan Thomas. I know of someone who, with Trevante Turner, went and shot up Rich Homie Kwan's father's barber shop in 2014. I know of someone who stole Donovan Thomas's nut chain and wallet and cell phone out of his truck in late 2014. And when asked about it by the police, repeatedly lied about that situation. Repeatedly pretended that him and Donovan Thomas were cool. I know someone who was jumped by Kelvin Watts in Club Crucial on January 6, 2015. I know someone who basically admitted on the stand, I'm listening, to shooting up the TIG studios at 675 Metropolitan Avenue on January 8th, 2015, 2 days before Donovan Thomas's death. A shooting which shot a hole in Rich Homie Kwan's windshield. And if you recall from the officer who responded to the scene, a shooting that very well may have occurred while Donovan Thomas was present. Remember, I asked that officer, were there people there in the studio at the time? Yes, there were. Who were they? I don't know. They wouldn't open the door. They wouldn't come and answer. And I know someone who was put on the proverbial plate by Donovan Thomas on January 8th, 2015. Mr. Kokomo, could you please play DS24F?
I got somebody, I don't know his name. He was there. He everything. He called the night. Well, I forgot what day they got killed, but it was a Friday night. It was Thursday night. They had a barbecue. But the barbecue just about it was blood and everything blood. And the whole meeting was based upon me. They was all in there talking about this and this, talking about this and this. So the nigga Mo was on the phone. So Mo told everybody, all I need, every last one of y'all, whoever 90s scraps here, whoever that other nigga name, supposed to kill me. They gave all them guns. The same night they gave every last one gun. Said treat me to a gas station and kill me. I forgot what else. But he called and he told me everything and he said, is this person a friend of yours?
That's good. The whole meeting was based on me. Gave all of them guns. They were instructed to trick me to the gas station. This wasn't some universal Donovan Thomas after everyone. This wasn't Donovan Thomas after YSL. It certainly wasn't Donovan Thomas after Shannon Stillwell. They were after Kenneth Copeland. I know somebody who had the opportunity. Not only does cell phone records put him right in the area, but we know the car was, we know the shooting, the murder was perpetrated using a certain Infiniti. An Infiniti that was rented for Kenneth Copeland by Jeffrey Williams. Because Kenneth Copeland needed a car. An Infiniti that Kenneth Copeland was in possession of the day before the Donovan Thomas shooting. An Infiniti which was last known to be in the hands of Kenneth Copeland and Quindarius Zachary before, according to Kenneth Copeland, he handed it off to his good friend, closest associate, partner in shooting up Rich Homie Kwan's father's barbershop, Trevante Turner, also known as Threat. In conclusion, regarding count 2, ladies and gentlemen, there is an absolute lack of reliable evidence against Shannon Stillwell. He had no motive. His problems with all these people happened afterwards. Once APD falsely accused him, once the streets falsely accused him of committing this crime, that's when people started shooting at his head and shooting at cars he was riding in. He didn't have any problems with Donovan Thomas. There's no evidence of that. There's no forensics, no DNA, no cell phone records putting Shannon Stillwell at any scenes. He's not on the Texaco video. It's just 2 witnesses, both proven and admitted liars who changed their stories repeatedly on tape, right in front of all of us. Both people who had every reason to lie when they gave their stories. 2 people that were chosen by the state to be the key witnesses in the case. But 2 witnesses, to their credit, who at least came in here and owned up to the fact that they were weak. They chose themselves. They chose to lie on others to save themselves, and at least they came in and told you that. Other than that, there's no corroboration at all. All right. We got a little more to go, okay?
Let's take.
That was my hint.
I picked up.
Thank you. All right, go ahead, Mr. Schardt.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. I see the coffee. I can take a hint. We're almost there, okay? We're going to move on to the Shamel Drinks murder from March 14, 2022. And there are several counts regarding this case. Count 49 charges my client, Mr. Stillwell, with murder. Mr. Kokomo, if you could show 50. 50 charges participation in criminal street gang activity based on the murder. 51 charges criminal street gang activity based on murder. And 52 charges possession of firearm by a convicted felon for March 14th, 2022, based on the belief that if a murder was committed by Mr. Stillwell, he must have had a gun. And count 54 is charged possession of firearm during commission of a felony, being the murder. My point is all of these counts are predicated on the murder charge. And so I'm not going to focus on any of the other counts. I'm just going to focus on count 49, which is the murder charge. Okay, so turning the page to the March 14th, 2022 Shamel Drinks murder case. Let's start out by just reviewing kind of the basic evidence, standard evidence, and then we're going to get into some of the more complicated matters that came up during trial. There's no eyewitnesses. There's no DNA. There's a fingerprint that was briefly alluded to that was found on Shamel Drinks' car that does not belong to Mr. Stillwell or anyone else in this case. There's no ballistic matches. We know that the projectiles or the bullets that hit Mr. Drinks twice, once in the neck, once in the arm, we know that they were .40 caliber bullets. Okay? That's what we know. What else have we heard through trial? We heard about a phone that Mr. Stillwell had. We heard a lot of his songs off that phone, and we also heard about some other things. We heard about a article that Mr. Stillwell or someone with Mr. Stillwell's phone, we'll say Mr. Stillwell, clicked on March 17th, 2022. Okay, it was a Fox News article about a shooting on Windsor Street. Okay, that's 3 days after the homicide. That is after Mr. Stillwell's girlfriend at the time, Miss Alexander, alerted him to the fact that there was a shooting on Windsor Street. It's after the fact, it's after she sent a post posted by someone else on Instagram about this shooting on Windsor Street. It's after his grandmother, Miss Jackson, reached out to him to check if he was okay because she saw the news report about this shooting on the news. All that happened on the evening of March 14th. That's how quickly news traveled. It should be of no surprise that by March 17th, probably sooner than that, there was an article about this incident on the internet, on the Fox News website, the local Fox 5 website. Mr. Stillwell clicked on an article 3 days afterwards. Additionally, we heard about Mr. Stillwell being we know that he's in the rap, or he's trying to make his way in the rap game, And we know that on the evening of March 14th, going into March 15th, Mr. Stillwell was in the studio. And we know there was a note in his phone that talked about a very standard, very common, not a particularly unique line at all, not unique at all, to be quite honest, from drill music, about ops. That was put in his notes while he was in the studio making drill music. So we have that. Neither of those two things in his phone are particularly noteworthy. They're not strong evidence of anything. But they were brought to your attention by Investigator Viverito, who searched his phone far and wide for any information she could find. And that was what she found. We heard about social media posts. And we heard that those social media posts were collected by Investigator Viverito. And we went back and forth with Investigator Viverito, we being me, about her work collecting those posts. There's no reports on who she was following, what she was looking for, who she was checking out on Instagram, who she wasn't checking out on Instagram. We also know from the post by Mr. Nichols that was presented to you initially in a far different form than it was actually on the internet, that Investigator Viverito was not only collecting posts, but she was manipulating posts to present to you in the way that she deemed fit, because she is biased. We learned that there were several people that made posts about the goings-ons in March of 2022. We know, and I'm not going to hide from it, that Mr. Stillwell made posts about Maine, Christian McMiller's death on March 11th, about Darius Ford's death, about how his heart is broken, about how he ain't going to be the only one crying. We know that there were posts on both sides from everyone in the community about what was going on in March 2022. But the takeaway from the post is this, and it actually came from Investigator Viverito. I don't think she really wanted to admit it, but she did. We talked to her about the March 11th killing of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford, and about that investigation. Now we're talking about 2 years and 8 months ago now. How it remains unsolved, how no one's been charged. Okay? And we looked at some of the posts that were made in reference to that incident. We learned about a Big Nick who posted just after that incident, slime and chalk. And we know what that, it's pretty self-explanatory. And we know about these other accounts. Edgewood, I think it was Edgewood James and Joey Hurst, two other accounts that weren't necessarily their names, may have been kind of like pseudo accounts or fictitious accounts, celebrating in really the most vile ways possible, celebrating the deaths of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford. And I asked Investigator Viverito, and she confirmed, even if they're fictitious accounts, you can see who was posting. You could pull an IP address. You could try to look into that and figure out who was posting. If you really thought that these posts, if you really thought posting about the crime was a confession to murder. And she agreed, she could, but they didn't, because it's not. We learned about Kelvin Watts, also known as Shell Cal. And we saw the post that he made right after the murder of the double homicide of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford, about him putting 2 shells under Donovan Thomas's eyes, about him looking in the camera and putting 2 shells under his eyes, 4 different posts, Another post about with 2 shells and lips sealed. And we talked to Investigator Viverito about what those shells meant. And they meant bodies in her estimation. So Kelvin Watts is sitting there posting, putting symbols of dead bodies under his own eyes in his own way with the shells. And I asked Investigator Viverito, oh, and he also made a song. We heard about the song he made, Mafia Story, where he's celebrating the death, where he's describing the death, how they were in a fast car and how they died on the freeway. Direct references to the death of Christian McMiller and Darius Ford. And so I asked Investigator Viverito, all these posts that Kelvin Watts has made, has he been charged? And the answer was no. And why was the answer no? Because posts on the internet about the death of people, even claims of responsibility, such as putting two shells under your own eyes, that's not enough to charge someone. That's not a confession. Investigator Viverito said the reality is, in this day and age, under these circumstances, dealing in this situation with the drill music and everything else, there's false claiming going on all the time. We can't go by what's on the internet. We can't go by what people post. That's not a confession. That's what we learned from Investigator Viverito. That's what she was forced to concede when we talked about the Christian McMiller and Darius Ford deaths. So when we're analyzing crude, inappropriate, idiotic posts that are made by Demekion Garlington, or even my client, Mr. Stilwell, let's keep that in mind. Those aren't confessions. Those are posts, and they're common. And even Investigator Viverito, who I have maintained pretty clearly is not an honest broker, was biased, even she had to admit that. Ballistics is interesting because we know about the FN that Mr. Stilwell is allegedly being linked with, 5-7 FN, and that was always a hole in the state's case, right? Mr. Drinks was shot with a .40 caliber bullets. Mr. Stilwell has never been linked to any weapon that shoots .40 caliber bullets, at least not in 2022. So Investigator Viverito shows up in court, looking to put her stamp on the case, looking to sway the jurors. And she looks at a video and she says, yeah, on that table, I think that's a Glock 27 based on the bottom of the grip. I'm not an expert. I'm not saying it is, but I'm just going to kind of hypothesize in front of the jury that it's a Glock 27 and they shoot .40 caliber bullets. Okay, you're not an expert, but you're throwing that in front of the jury. Never said it before until you're on the stand. And what's your experience with Glock 27s? Well, one time I went to the gun store and I was trying to decide what kind of gun to buy, and I held the Glock 27. That's it. Think about Investigator Viverito and her bias and her trying to sway you and identify or claim to identify a firearm and a naked model from that picture and what her basis is, what her real basis is. Any evidence that Mr. Stilwell ever possessed that gun? And what did she say? She just can't answer no, because of course there's no evidence that Mr. Stillwell has ever possessed that gun. She says, well, do you have any evidence? Or I don't have any evidence that he didn't. Well, geez, that's an interesting shifting of the burden of proof from the state's witness. She's biased. She came in there to try to solve a key problem of the state's case, which is that Mr. Stillwell is not linked to any weapon that could possibly shoot the fatal bullets in the Shamel Drinks case. And she tried to solve that problem for the state with her little trick and her little identification based on one-time handling a gun in some pawn shop or some gun store somewhere. Don't fall for it. It just shows her bias. So we heard the wiretaps. State brought on the wiretaps. And yes, the wiretaps do show Mr. Stillwell. We heard a call, Mr. Stillwell laughing about sneaking out when the police showed up and talking about taking a stick and his FN from the house after the police showed up. We own that. We acknowledge that. Neither of those guns could shoot the bullets that killed Mr. Drinks. But there was another wiretap that was played that I'd like us to just hear again. And Mr. Kokomo, you know where I'm going? Okay. It was from a call on April 1st, 12:29 a.m. And the state made such a big deal of this. Of course, the wiretap, hold on one second, just don't play it. Thank you. The state made a big deal of this because it's a wiretap. Demekion Garlington's on one end on his cell phone. And the state made such a big deal about Mr. Stillwell, what he was doing on this call on April 1st. Of course, we know he was in jail. He'd been arrested on March 17th. So he's in jail, and he's talking to Demekion Garlington. And they make a big deal. He's on a contraband phone. He's on a contraband phone. Now, I'm not saying that's right, but let's think about that scenario for a second. We've been sitting here for a year listening to the same. This call is subject to being recorded, right? Every time someone comes from the jail, because it is recorded. Mr. Stillwell's on a cell phone. He doesn't know Mr. Garlington's phone is tapped. Mr. Garlington doesn't know his phone is tapped. As far as they're concerned, they're having a private conversation. They have cut out the recording and are having a private conversation about March 14th, 2022. And what do they say? First, Mr. Kokomo, could you play 239 to 310?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's what I'm telling folks. I'm like, shit, what the hell they locked up for? Like, they just saying about it. I'm like, bro, they good. I'm just like, they gonna assume some shit like that anyway. They gonna assume that, like, oh, like, y'all ain't did, ain't feel me, so.
That's what I keep telling goddamn, Lil, I keep telling him, like, just chill, like, I know,
cause they
this ain't nothing. Yeah, I'm like, this ain't nothing, bro. Like, they just doing that cut. It seems as a goddamn gas station. Like, just chill. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
In this private conversation that they're having, they're not saying, oh, how can we cover this up? Oh, I think they're onto us. Oh, no, I think they got us. They're saying, we didn't do anything. They're just assuming we did stuff because we're at the gas station, which is a fact that we have never denied. They were, in fact, at the gas station. They're having a private conversation, and they're talking about how innocent they are and how the police got it wrong. And Mr. Stillwell is just saying, let's let it work itself out. So let's go to 1210 to 1225, Mr. Kokomo. Thank you.
Yeah, I already know, like, when they got down, go to wiping down, doing them got down, them, you know, like gunpowder, forensics, all that shit there.
Yeah.
You gonna come back clean, you see what I'm saying? So I ain't tripping on that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, let's consider that comment. First of all, no one said the car has been cleaned. It's going to come back clean, is what was said. And now, listen to what Mr. Stillwell says. Once they GD going to wipe it down, doing GD, you know, the gunpowder forensic, all that S, H-I-T. The gunpowder forensic, does Mr. Stillwell sound like an expert in gunshot residue there? Does he really sound like someone that's going to say, oh, I have so much inside knowledge on this forensic work that the police do on the inside of cars that we must clean the headliner of all things? No. He sounds like someone who knows that they were in a car on March 14th, 2022, knows that they were at the BP, knows that they left and they drove down Windsor Street, and knows, despite the fact that he's been arrested falsely for killing another gentleman, he knows in his heart that no gun was fired by him inside that car or outside that car. That's how he knows it's going to come back clean. It's not some devious mastermind that's got some inside information on the forensic work. He barely knows what he's talking about. You know, that gunpowder forensic, all that S-H-I-T. That's the comment of someone that knows where they were on March 14th and where they were driving and what they did not do. And what they did not do was fire a gun. Let's talk about the rental car. State made a big deal of this rental car. Yes, Mr. Stillwell rented a car on March 14, 2022. First of all, we've seen the BP tape. There was no plan, okay? This was a chance encounter. It was unforeseen that Shmuel Drinks would ever show up at a gas station. So there's no indication that people would be renting a car in anticipation of running into Shmuel Drinks. Okay? The reality is we heard about what was going on in Mr. Stillwell's life. We know from his phone. We heard from Miss Alexander, who testified. Remember what she said? March 9th. I was robbed. I said she's in the cash business. She said, no, I dance. Okay, that's fine. I didn't want to put it out there, but she did. She dances. She carries large amounts of money. And people ran up on her with their guns out and tried to rob her. And remember what she said? I said, you shot at them in self-defense. She said, no, I shot them. She didn't have any remorse about that because people ran up on her to try to take her stuff at gunpoint. But she was concerned about the blowback. She was concerned about people coming back to get her. Couple that with the fact that Mr. Stillwell has had a target on his back since 2015. Couple that with the fact that Mr. Ford and Mr. McMiller were just ruthlessly murdered on the freeway while driving in a car that obviously someone knew who they were and had an idea of what kind of car they were in. Is it really any wonder why a car was rented by Mr. Stillwell and Miss Alexander on March 14th? If it's such a secret, if there was such a plan behind this car, isn't it odd that Mr. Stillwell, first of all, they ordered it online ahead of time. Mr. Stillwell walks in there on surveillance, gives his ID, gives his name. It wasn't no secret. They were renting a car because things had gotten dangerous. They were trying to survive. And then we make a big deal of these tints. Yeah, they did put a tint on the car. That was kind of the point. That was exactly the point. No one's hiding from that. Mr. Stillwell was scared for his safety. He was scared for Miss Alexander's safety. And the first thing he did that night is went and got window tints on the car. And yes, he broke the rental agreement in doing so. We acknowledge that as well. If this was a car that was involved in a homicide on March 14th, let's consider Mr. Stillwell's actions after the fact. I don't know. It seems logical to me that if I'm in a rental car and I use it as part of a homicide, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of said rental car. Distance myself from the rental car. It's on video at the BP. It's on video on Windsor Street. There's surveillance cameras all over the place in Atlanta. The first thing anyone would do if they committed a crime as heinous as this in a rental car is get rid of it. Well, what do we know that Mr. Stillwell does? Well, first of all, he runs into Investigator Viverito at 2830 Waters Road a day after the homicide, wearing the same clothes he was wearing in the BP, by the way, not really concealing his identity there. And he tells Investigator Viverito, yeah, that's the car I'm in. That's the car I'm riding in. And then what does he do later in the day on the 16th? Does he go into Griffin, Georgia and burn it in some back road somewhere? Does he go drop it off in Alabama? No. He calls Alamo and extends the rental until the 20th. Ask yourselves, really? Are those the actions of someone with a guilty conscience? Are those the actions of someone who committed a crime in a rental car? Absolutely not. Why is he doing these things? Because just like how he knows the car is going to come back clean, he knows he didn't do anything in that car. He knows he's innocent. He has no reason to get rid of the car. Okay, let's talk about Dr. Melissa Sims Stanley. She was the medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Shamel Drinks. She was very important. We didn't realize how important she was at the time, but she was very important. She testified that there were 2 wounds to Mr. Drinks, one to his arm and one to his neck. We don't know which order they came in, but we know the shot to the neck was the fatal injury. It caused a massive injury to the base of his skull and the base of his brain. Dr. Sims Stanley testified about the effects of such an injury. Death would be immediate, and if not immediate, imminent. But more importantly, conscious control of bodily movements would be immediately lost due to this massive injury to the base of the brain. The ability to move body parts up and down would be immediately lost. That came out in her testimony. Now, the state followed up and said, is it possible if Mr. Drinks' foot was already on the brake when he was shot, is it possible for his foot to remain on the brake? And Dr. Sims Stanley's answer was yes. And of course it is, because staying on the brake does not require any conscious bodily movement. But on cross, I asked a very simple question. Is it possible after being shot, that shot in the neck, that Mr. Drinks would be able to actively move his foot up and down off the brake? And unequivocally, with no hesitation, Dr. Sims Stanley said, no, that would not be possible. It would not be possible for Mr. Drinks, after being shot in the neck, to move his foot up and down off that brake. We're going to get to why that, I'm certain many of you know why that's important, but we're going to get to why that's important in a minute. Let's talk about gunshot residue. Detective Hogan was the lead detective in this case. We know, much like the video, he took out warrants without ever having watched the video in this case, the FedEx video. He relied on a FedEx employee to describe it to him. We also know that he didn't wait for any gunshot residue results to come back before taking out warrants either, before assuming the guilt of my client, Mr. Stillwell. He, in fact, when he testified, seemed unaware that there was even any gunshot residue tests performed or anything had been collected. But then we talked to Antoinette Green, who was the crime scene tech, who processed the the white Audi. And she processed the red Versa, but she processed the white Audi. And she informed us that it was, in fact, Detective Hogan who requested that she collect the headliner for the purpose of testing for gunshot residue. And I asked crime scene tech Green, did that seem like an appropriate request to you? Collecting the headliner to test for gunshot residue within that car. And she said, yes. The location seemed appropriate. The location of the headliner seemed appropriate. And the fabric that the headliner was made of made it a very appropriate piece of the car to collect, to be later tested for gunshot residue. And so she collected it. In fact, she didn't just collect the part over the sunroof. She cut out around that part as well and collected it all and sealed it up just like she does in every other case. She did her job. She collected it, she sealed it, and she sent it to GBI for testing. I asked scientist, Mr. Colvin, who tested for gunshot residue. I said, well, how about you? What is your thoughts? You ever test headliners before? Yeah, all the time. Okay, does that seem an appropriate part of the car to collect, to test for gunshot residue? Absolutely. The fabric is the type of fabric that would tend to hold on to the gunshot residue, to maintain the gunshot residue as opposed to someone's hands or something like that. And also the location is very appropriate. So we heard what Mr. Colvin did. We heard about his process, which is all by the books, all by procedure, how he dabbed that headliner. And he didn't just use one tab, he used two. And he dabbed that headliner again and again and again until one tab lost stickiness, and then he moved to the other tab and continued to dab. And what is he dabbing for? Microscopic particles of gunshot residue that are emitted from a gun when it is fired. And he takes these tabs that he has been dabbing on the headliner, and then he looks at it under a microscope, under an electron beam, to look for microscopic particles, of which there are many emitted from a gun when it is fired. A plume of them are emitted from the gun when it is fired. And he looked under that electron microscope, and his results were negative. And what does negative mean? Negative doesn't mean, oh, it's under some threshold, under 5 per cubic foot or anything like that. Negative means 0. 0 particles collected off that headliner that was collected from the white Audi. So, of course, we're going to talk about the video. The video that Investigator Viverito couldn't wait to talk about when she was on the stand, and I wanted to ask her questions about other things. The video that Detective Hogan had not watched at the time that he took out warrants for my client. Mr. Kokomo, could you pull up the video? Okay. And I just want to give a little timeline of what I submit we're going to see from this video. We're going to see 3 cars in a line. We're going to see a 4th car, a white car, pull up behind Mr. Stillwell in a driving fast. We're going to see Mr. Stillwell pull off. 16 seconds later, we're going to see Mr. Drink's brake lights go on and off. 16 seconds after Mr. Stillwell has been long gone. 18 seconds after Mr. Stillwell leaves, we're going to see a fifth car make an unexplained U-turn. 30 seconds after Mr. Stillwell has pulled off, we're going to see Mr. Drink's brake lights flicker on and off again. And finally, for a third time, 33 seconds after Mr. Stillwell has pulled off, we're going to see Mr. Drink's brake lights go on and off once again. Investigator Viverito wasn't correct. It doesn't happen one time. The brakes go on and off 3 different times in this video. And we're going to watch it. Pause. Okay, right here, we have 3 cars lined up. Mr. Drink's red Versa on the left, Mr. Stillwell in the white Audi in the middle, and Mr. Nichols and Mr. Boyer, according to the state, and Mr. Farley in the right. I invite you, when you're deliberating, I invite you right now, when you're deliberating later on, if you need to review this video, you can look as many times as you want. I want you to look to see if you see a muzzle flash. At any time when Mr. Stillwell's car is next to Mr. Drink's. We see a 4th car speed up behind Mr. Stillwell. Pause. And Mr. Stillwell leaves. What's going through Mr. Stillwell's mind right now? Is it that common theme of drill music that he knows about, Red Light? Is it Future's song, Red Light? Yeah, and this shit real out here, running through the red light, looking through your rear view, and might just sneak up on the car and try to spray you? Is that what's going on in Mr. Stillwell's mind? Is that what he's thinking about as he sees this 4th car speed up behind him? Or maybe he's thinking about that night, September 26, 2015, when he was in that car with Tiara Jones and Miss Duncan, and that car sped up behind them and started spraying the car they were in through the rear windshield. Either way, Mr. Stillwell gets on. Mr. Nichols, apparently confused, is trying to figure out what's going on, and he eventually leaves as well. Okay, pause. Pause. Okay. That 4th car, not Mr. Stillwell's car, that 4th car that has never been identified, has never been tested for gunshot residue, is now next to Mr. Drink's. And there's a 5th car driving up the street, driving up Windsor Street. And let's see what happens. Stop. Okay, back it up, Mr. Kokomo, a couple of seconds. Okay, pause. Okay, I want you to look closely. Right here, we're going to see the 5th car make a sudden U-turn. Is there someone in the street? Is there someone waving at that car to make that U-turn? Is there an obstruction? Is there anything going on that would explain why that car makes that U-turn at that exact time? No, there's not. There's one explanation. Hold on, Mr. Kokomo. There's one explanation and one explanation only. That car hears a gunshot. And while that car makes a U-turn, I want you to look at Mr. Drink's brake lights, they flicker on and off. That means he's not dead. He has not been shot in the neck yet. That's science. That's from Dr. Sim Stanley herself. What could be happening, I submit to you, because we don't know the order of the wounds. What could be happening, what makes the most sense, is that at this exact moment, that car that's next to Mr. Drinks fires a shot into the car. Remember, there's 2 wounds to Mr. Drinks, but there's really 3 shots, because one projectile ends up going into his arm and it's on the seat and is collected by Miss Green, CST Green. Another projectile ends up sadly in his body and is collected by the ME. A third projectile goes through Mr. Drinks' car because we see the exit wound, where the bullet exited Mr. Drinks' driver's side front door. So there's at least 3 shots that are fired into Mr. Drinks' car. I submit to you, at this exact moment, first shot is being fired, that car hears it, is making a U-turn, and Mr. Drinks is trying to react, perhaps moving around, going up and down off the brake, trying to figure out what's going on, perhaps trying to find a firearm that he has in his car, trying to figure out what's going on, as he's certainly not anticipating or expecting to be shot at that exact moment. That car, that white car, remains next to Mr. Drinks. Up. Back it up, Mr. Kokomo. And before he leaves, we see a slight flicker of the brake light right there. And then if we play it again, and no more flickers. At that moment, tragically, the fatal shot was fired from that 4th car into Mr. Drinks' red Versa, going into his neck, causing him to immediately lose all bodily control and eventually leading to his imminent death. And that white car, that 4th car, leaves the scene. That last brake light flicker was 34 seconds after Mr. Stillwell had already left. It is scientifically impossible that Mr. Stillwell killed Mr. Drinks. Couple that with the gunshot residue test that proves that a gun was not fired from the car. Couple that with Mr. Stillwell's behavior, him not distancing himself from the car, but extending his rental. Couple that with the call that we heard on the wiretap of him and Mr. Garlington speaking candidly, talking about how the police are just making an assumption that they know they did nothing to Mr. Drinks. This case is clear. Mr. Stillwell, as convenient as it is for the inconvenient as it is for the state to admit it, he didn't kill Mr. Drinks. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to conclude. For nearly a decade, the prosecution, the police, the gang investigators, they have focused on this group of people. Jeffrey Williams, Shannon Stillwell, and many others. They're young men that grew up in hard times and had dreams of their own They saw something different in Mr. Williams, a confidence, an ability to turn negative to positive, like so many hip-hop artists before him. They were attracted to Mr. Williams. They identified with him, but they also saw opportunity to chase their own dreams, to get in the studio, to make connections, to hopefully make it big. And it worked out for some of them. Woney Lee is now a signed artist. He's not alone. But for nearly a decade, these gentlemen have been followed on social media. Prosecutors and police officers have listened to their music, have scrutinized their artistic expression, leaving no room for artistic license, leaving no room for hyperbole. They've searched residences. They've taken jewelry. They've seized cars. They've subpoenaed phone records. They've taken people's cell phones. They've extracted the contents of those cell phones. They've tapped phones. And most egregiously, they have systematically sought out people. People that are so weak, so scared of jail, so scared of the consequences of their own action, that they are willing to lie on others to save their own skin. And they have systematically sought out those people. And systematically sought out those people at the very time when those people were in crisis. And they've made threats to those people about how they're going to be locked up for decades, not get out till they're 48 years old. And they've made implicit promises to those people. Help me help you. You're a small fish. We're interested in the big fish. I'll be on the phone with the DA as soon as we are done. This ain't 68 plus 1. I'm not going to do you and you owe me one. It don't work like that. You have to give information. You're an armed career criminal. You're going away for 25 years, no parole. It's all up to you. They're going to ask, what did he do to help himself out? That's the game, the sick game that has been played, that's built this case from its inception. It needs to stop. For over a year, the prosecutors and gang investigators in this case have had their hammer out, trying to bang that square peg, their evidence, into that round hole, which is their narrative. And it still doesn't fit. It never will fit. The album cover that they tried to bang on and make it be a gang declaration of war, it never was, it never will be. That video of Antonio Sledge that they claim is an overt act, that they wouldn't, where Antonio Sledge is threatening another man because they're both having sex with the same lady, and he's upset and he's in his emotions. Remember that? And how they wouldn't let Antonio Sledge enter a guilty plea. They wouldn't let him go home to his sick mother, go home to his kids, until he signed the plea deal that said that somehow that this is gang related. Just banging, trying to make it fit. Of course it wasn't gang related. They're both having relations with the same girl. It was over a girl. It had nothing to do with gangs. But they tried to make it fit. 24M on an end's head. They say it's putting money on someone's head and ordering an assassination, and they bang and try to make it fit. Of course, it had nothing to do with that. We all know what that was about. And that gang investigators do it too. No rules, no initiation, no jumping in, nothing that is synonymous with gangs as we know it, letting whomever wants to be part of the group in on their own terms, out on their own terms, worldwide people identifying with YSL, and they bang and try to make it something it's not, and label it a hybrid gang. Think about the FedEx video. How many different versions did we hear? How many different hypotheticals from the state? Oh, no muzzle flash, must have been shot inside the car. Oh, well, no GSR, must be shot from outside the car. Oh, well, the windows were just tinted, can't roll down the window, must have opened the door. Oh, no GSR, must have been cleaned. Oh, no evidence of it being cleaned, must have been vacuumed. Oh, or maybe scientist Colvin with the GBI, maybe he tested it incorrectly. Maybe he only dabbed on certain parts that didn't have GSR, as if GSR all accumulates in one little spot, as if it's not a plume, as if it's not all over an object where it's shot. These are all their theories that they try to use. Oh, the GSR must have fallen off in the bag, the sealed bag, this bag that was sealed and protected from the elements, just like every other piece of evidence they use in prosecutions of other cases. Just throwing stuff out there. Just continuing trying to bang, 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 bang. Just make it fit. Make it look good. It's never going to fit because it's not the truth. They don't have an explanation of why that car did a U-turn. There's only one logical explanation. They don't have an explanation for that negative GSR test. They don't have an explanation of why their own witness, a doctor, the ME, said that upon that shot, all bodily control would be lost. And we see the brake light go on and off 3 times after Shannon Stillwell's gone. They don't have explanations, but they just want to bang, bang, bang and try so hard to make it fit. I've had enough of the hammering. I've had enough of the square peg. I've had enough of their narrative and their theory. It's been a year. It's time to put the hammer down. Let's follow the evidence and not the state's narrative. If we follow the real evidence in this case, not what they're trying to sell you, you will come to the conclusion that the state has not proven count 1, conspiracy to violate the RICO Act beyond a reasonable doubt, and you will return the only just verdict in that case and find Mr. Stillwell not guilty. If we follow the evidence and not the narrative about count 2, Donovan Thomas, you will find that the testimony, the uncorroborated testimony of admitted liar Kenneth Copeland and admitted liar Quindarius Zachary is woefully insufficient. That there's reasonable doubt all over the place, and you will find Mr. Stillwell not guilty of count 2. And if we follow the evidence, you will find that not only has the state not proven that that Shannon Stillwell shot Shamel Drinks, not only have they not proven that beyond a reasonable doubt, but it's crystal clear that Mr. Stillwell did not commit that crime. And the only just verdict for counts 49 through 54 will be not guilty. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your time and attention.
Cancel approach real fast for me.